Welcome to Northlandia, a place to bring your curiosity because here you'll find curiosities. I'm Wyatt Buckner of the Duluth News Tribune, and I'll be your guide as we discover the unique and fascinating stories here in the Northland. Here we celebrate the region's distinctive people, places, and history. In this episode, we look at glass eyeballs, other curious artifacts, and the historical societies that house them. Let's venture forth into Northlandia. Here to help us learn about our region's unique history and the places that preserve it is News Tribune reporter Teri Cadeau. Teri, welcome back. Now on episode 50 of the Northlandia podcast. The big 50 is here now.
Yes, I was not aware of that, and that feels like pressure, but that's fine. It's great. Not a problem. We'll make it through.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's a fitting one, especially given, similar to the Pokemass one, when we were talking about this recording the other day and planning it out, you offered to give me the quick pitch for it, which was
200 glass eyeballs.
See, if that doesn't stoke your interest, I don't know if this podcast is for you. So hopefully it does, and welcome.
Also, we're adding that to the list of ever-growing list of newsroom band names. So,
oh, yeah.
200 glass eyeballs.
We did talk about that. They'd come up in the newsroom meeting following that.
I purported it should be a metal ska band. I still stand by that.
If it's not now, it probably will be at some point. It's kind of inevitable that it's just going to all be cycled through.
Somebody's going to hear this and going to be like, that's the name. We've been looking for it. That's the sound we've been looking for. 200 glass eyeballs. I'm sorry.
And listeners will know that they heard it first here on the Northlandia podcast.
Correct.
So, Teri, this story's kind of got two folds to it. One, you're exploring, curious artifacts, like the aforementioned glass eyeballs we'll get more into a little bit later here, but also the places that these things can be found at. So I guess what set you forth on this quest into Northlandia's history and more specifically the places that house them?
So I've been kind of circling around this idea for a long time now. Basically, it started sometime around this fall, I want to say, where I was like, I just noticed that we have an awful lot of historical societies throughout the Northland. We have nearly every town, not every town, but nearly every town has one or has some form of one, or they're a part of one in a neighboring town, whatever the case may be.
We featured a few on this show.
They've come up a lot.
The Three and Birthplace Museum, the Judy Garland Museum, indirectly has been mentioned.
Yeah.
There's even more beyond that.
But even those aren't the only historical, you know what I mean? The Birthplace Museum is part of this, but it's not the entire, there's more. And 3M Museum, that's part of the Lake County Historical Society, the larger entities. So it was like, okay, this is something. I feel like whenever we reach out to them, whenever I look into them, it'd be like, okay, we have very strict hours of 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. on Monday and Tuesday. Reach out during those times only and only those times, because a lot of places don't have a huge staff. And so I was like, well, this seems like it'd be worth reaching out to them and being like, okay, why do you do what you do? Why is this important to you? And what do you need to keep this venture going in the future? And so I made a huge list, a master list of a bunch of the historical societies in the area and their contacts and emails. And I was thinking about how to approach it. And then I hesitated for a long time, all the way into February. And then I was like, you know what? We're just going to do this. We're going to send out an email. We're going to ask 3 or 4 main questions and see what kind of responses I get. And I got a lot of really good responses. I sent something like 12 to 14 emails within an hour of hey, what do you think? And I got back I want to say around 8 of them, which is a pretty good response rate for just an outreach, hey, eh? Mm-hmm. And I've even heard from some since I wrote this story that were like, hey, we saw that. We didn't get you in time, but, we think of us in the future. And I'm like, okay, we'll do.
If it's anything like Northland statues, I'm sure there will be opportunities in the future to do follow-ups.
Yeah, and if they have any specific story ideas of hey, here's this really interesting thing that no one knows about, tell us. Please reach out. Be like, hey, do you know about this? Because I feel like you don't, and you should. Mm-hmm. That's great.
So who did you get a hold of for this specific article that you focused on this time around?
I'm going to try and name all of them. I'm going to double check the story in a second just to make sure I get them all. But here we go.
All right.
The very brief list. So who I talked to included the Tower Sudan Historical Society, the Virginia Area Historical Society, the Hibbing Historical Society, the Bay Area Historical Society, that's up near Silver Bay area and Beaver Bay, the Cook County Historical Society, the Moose Lake Historical Society, and the Carleton County Historical Society.
And were you able to feature all of them in this same article?
Those are all the ones that I mentioned in the article. I don't think I heard from anyone that I didn't use at least a quote from them or some sort of mention of an artifact. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's everyone stuffed into this is one piece.
All right, so what can you tell?
It was a challenge.
I bet. And there's still more out there.
Yeah, there's still more. Yeah.
I wonder how many people are aware of how many historical societies we have in our region.
Well, that's kind of my goal here is to be like, hey, look, there's one in your neighborhood, most likely.
Is it fair to say that it seems like most of the major cities seem to have some kind of historical society? Maybe not like, maybe not like McKinley or something, or maybe there is. I don't know.
McKinley has.
They have one. Okay, I take it back.
No,
I apologize.
Wait. McKinley near Gilbert. You're talking about, right? Yeah. They house the Iron Range Area Historical Society. It used to be in Gilbert, but it got moved over there. That I know from past stories.
See, answer my own question that, like, even I don't know a lot, some of them.
But then you'd also think, like, Gilbert is big enough, you'd be like, oh, Gilbert should have, and it's like, no, well, they did, but they got moved. Yeah.
So what can you tell me about these historical societies, several of them?
I can tell you that it's run by, they're all run by very dedicated people who are really into history and wanting to preserve it and wanting to keep it going forward. And a lot of them got into it in very interesting ways. They kind of got pulled in. A lot of them by family members of being like, oh, hey, you're back in the area and you're retired. Want to join the Historical Society?
I like the way you can't really visualize it, no. But Teri just kind of leaned forward as almost kind of like, you want in.
Yes. I think you could hear it. So, yeah, a lot of people, like family members, both at the Virginia Area Historical and the Tower Sudan, they mentioned like going to family reunions and being like, oh, hey, you're good at grant writing. Great. We need that. So that's a good way that people get involved. But then also there's somebody like over in Carleton County, the curator there, she got involved because she moved to the area and she wanted to learn more about the area's history. She was like, I don't know anything about the history here. Let's dive in. Let me learn more. Mm-hmm. She's a retired history professor, so she was like, let's go. Let me do this. Mm-hmm. And she's found some very, very interesting things over there.
And what did you learn of, like, what some of these historical societies have, like in terms of the artifacts or things that they had to showcase or interesting history tidbits that they're putting out there?
Let me say this. If you like trains, you should go to your local historical society, because any historical society in this area pretty much has something to do with trains. Maybe they have some that they were housed in a former depot and they have a bunch of trains still around, or they are in the depot so they have a bunch of artifacts and information. So if you're really into that, that's a big thing for you. Otherwise, they have a lot of like very specific local history. So for example, in Moose Lake, you can find everything you ever wanted to know about the 1918 fires. And one of the volunteers there talked a lot about how she gets to interact with kids as they come through tours and they get to talk about the fires, and one of the kids thought that she had lived through it because she knew so much about it. She's like, I'm not quite that old. That's not. I just know a lot about the fires. I'm very dedicated. Mm-hmm. But yeah, and then there's a bunch of information about if you want to get at all into mining history. Tower Sudan has a huge amount. The Bay Area Historical Society has a huge amount. Virginia has a lot of it. So if anything you want to know about mining companies, you can find it. Just reach out and they'll gladly talk to you about it. Mm-hmm. But then there's also the more kind of odd artifacts, the more off the wall things that you're like, oh, I didn't totally expect that. And that's something that I specifically asked for when I reached out to these historical societies. I was like, what's something that we don't always necessarily hear about that you have that you think this is really neat, people should know about this? And I have to say, there was one standout. Say it with me. 200 glass eyeballs. Yeah, so that was at the Hibbing Historical Society. The curator there reached out and she said, okay, this is kind of odd, but we have this collection of glass eyeballs that an optometrist in town donated. And it kind of shows the history of like industrial accidents throughout the years, because these were all people's actual these were made for people, as well as like the changing times of how they changed and progressed over the years. So it shows kind of a lot of history, and it just looks really neat. And it's kind of off the wall. You look at it and you're like, that's intriguing. I kind of want to stare at that a little more. That's kind of creeping me out a little bit, but also great.
It's weird to like to stare at these glass eyeballs,
And she sent me this great picture of her like standing right behind it. And I'm like, yeah, that's my favorite. Thank you very much. That's exactly. She saw the assignment. She kind of knew exactly what to go for, and she went for it. And I was like, yes.
How big is this display? I haven't actually seen the photo yet.
It's decent size. It's like it's hard to describe in audio, but it's definitely, if you take a look at the photo that goes along with the article, it's a good size. Like it covers most of her body, like not huge, but like they're all in a row. They're all lined up. They're all like in their own little spots.
And then what other curious artifacts you found?
Okay. So the rest of them, they're a little more expected. They're not quite as off the wall, but I loved hearing a lot about the blacksmith shop up in Cook County. They have this really old family-run blacksmith shop that was run for years by this one family.
Is it in Grand Marais?
Yeah.
I've been there.
Nice.
Is it that by the folk school?
Yeah.
It's so cool.
Yeah.
I went there for, like, when I worked in TV, like, forever ago. We did a story, and there was, like, blacksmithing in the summer. Kids were learning how to blacksmith.
Yep.
It's so cool.
Yeah, and she talked, the president up there talked a lot about how you look at the walls and you can see these years of different tools and changes, and it just smells like a blacksmith shop from over the years. And then you walk in and it just kind of immerses you. You're like, wow, this is a unique place. It was owned by the I want to say Bally family. I'm not sure if that's pronounced correctly, but
I didn't realize that was part of a historical society.
Yeah.
I just thought it was just a blacksmith shop at a folk school. Like,
I gotta say, the Grand Marais Historical Society has like multiple buildings. Mm-hmm. They're very they're kind of elaborate. They're running things up there.
Grand Marais is awesome. I love Grand Marais.
Yeah. So they were definitely one that I was like, oh, tell me about your favorite thing, and they did, and I was like, yes, that's fantastic. But then also over in Carleton County,
a little further south from Grand Marais.
Yep, quite a bit.
Quite a bit.
Yeah, she talked a lot about a couple of things, but my favorite one that she chatted about was the collection of letters that they have. So there was this man during World War II who was tasked by the paper company that he worked for in Cloquet, because makes sense. Mm-hmm. And he was tasked with writing a letter and sending a deck of playing cards to the employees who were serving overseas during the war. And so he did that, and then he kept writing. So he had a correspondence with these men for a bit of time, and they have a collection of I want to say 57 of his letters that people kept or preserved and whatever. And part of it is he lost his son, and then he lost his other son during the war, and she feels like it's a little bit of speculation on her part, but she feels like maybe it was something that helped him deal with this loss by writing to these people and keeping them informed of what's going on in Cloquet. And it's a wealth of history of what was happening in Cloquet during the war, and so it was pretty fascinating. I was like, that is really cool to hear about.
Was there any other places that?
Yeah, we chatted a little bit about, or I guess another one that I kind of mentioned. It was interesting because it wasn't necessarily an artifact. It was a new mural up at the Bay Area Historical Society, which, first of all, I'm really glad to say I looked into them in the fall when I was looking into this the first time around, and I couldn't find anything. But then now they have a fancy, shiny new website, and it shows all their information and all their contact and everything that you'd want to know. And yeah, that was really fun to see. And the president out there talked a lot about their new mural, because they're building up in Silver Bay has a big mural that tells a lot about the mining history in the area, but then also features the lake and all the other bits and pieces of history. And he's like, that's kind of my favorite for now, because it's new, but it has a lot of historical foundation.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned earlier that one of the things you asked when you were inquiring to these different historical societies, what is it that they need from people in the community to kind of help them with?
Yeah, and obviously volunteers was absolutely something that I heard. They need people to be willing to spend some time there and work in different facets. And there's all kinds of different work that you can do. You can do anything from your working on the curating side to working on the just manning the museums that they have for a couple of hours. But then also they also need funding in different ways if you can contribute to them. But then also a lot of them listed the need for people to make donations of artifacts. The Hibbing curator talked a lot about how history isn't something that just gets preserved without it doesn't just happen. If you don't collect items or keep an eye or keep track of things and donate it yourself, or somebody else donates, on your behalf, it's not going to exist. So if you have things that you think are important, reach out to them and see if they're interested. See if they have need for them. Even if you're like, well, I don't know if it's important or not, reach out. They'd be able to tell you. Mm-hmm. I mean, I imagine the optometrist was like, hey, I got 200 glass eyeballs. Do you want them? Is that something you'd want? And they were like, yeah, please. So.
And now they're have their forever home, hopefully forever home.
And now they've been preserved in history in our little story here. And on now, the 50th episode.
Yeah, they're now immortalized in podcast form as well. They've ascended to the next level of historical records.
I love it.
Mm-hmm. So normally I feel like I would ask, like, which of the historical artifacts like stood out to you the most, but that seems pretty obvious. 200 glass eyeballs.
I'm sorry. I'm willing to, if anyone wants to send me more of like, hey, what about this interesting, please.
If anyone has a contender that you want to submit forward to compete against 200 glass eyeballs, we welcome the challenge.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Teri, and just, I normally end the podcast with this, some form of this question. Obviously, history is a big part of this podcast. We find unique curiosities, and even the historical societies themselves that have them. We've talked about the Three and Birthplace Museum. We've talked you've done a story about Knife River and various statues, and they're all kind of connected in a way. Yeah. But why do you feel like it's so important to put an extra emphasis on these societies and the artifacts that they have? And like you touched on a little bit, like preserving that Northland history as relevant and as weird as it can get. Yeah.
So basically, I think they deserve attention because we reach out to them literally all the time. And if they don't continue to exist, we're going to be calling places and they're going to have empty chairs there. We're going to be going, oh no, why can't I find XYZ? Why is there no information available? Without people, they won't continue to be a thing. So I think that's worth mentioning. In fact, I last month when I was working on the Polka Mass story, I talked with the Evelyn Heritage Society person, and he talked a lot about how they need people to step up. Otherwise, like, they're going to retire or God forbid, pass on, and there's not going to be people there to take up the mantle and be like, hey, I know what things are. I know what we have. I know, you can't call an empty chair.
That's fair. That's fair.
That's a thought I kept having. And I tried to put that into words for the story, and it didn't quite happen, but it's literally how it feels. Is like, if you call a historical society and the number rings and rings and there's nobody there to answer it, what are you going to do?
Mm-hmm. Until the AI takes over, and then they're
not going to be able to argue. They're not going to be able to look around and find what you know what I mean? That doesn't.
Yeah, there's limitations.
Yeah.
the important note being that the importance of people on what we do.
Yeah. And so we need to look at the people who do it. Why do they do it? And hopefully inspire some more to be like, yeah, I want to do that too.
Mm-hmm. All right, Teri. Well, I think we're up there. Thank you again so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And we don't have an episode planned for next week. We're going to take a week off after 50th episode. We've all been working quite hard and a lot of going around. Jay's currently on leave. So we're, making the best of that. He will be back though. But in 2 weeks from now, Jimmy and I will be joined by Mike Schultz and Haley Eidenschink with the Minnesota Astoria. So if you like talking about Northland history, well, we got more coming up with two that very much know their unique Northland history. Teri's laughing over here because she knows.
Yeah.
And then following that, so 3 weeks from now, we have a 1-year anniversary special coming up with all of the Northlandia team, including Jay. We pre-record this before his leave. So you'll get the whole Northland team, so it's exciting episodes. Stick around for that. And thank you all so much for joining us in this venture into Northlandia. To read the article for this week's column, visit duluthnewstribune.com/topics/Northlandia. You can find all the episodes of Northlandia on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you enjoy this podcast and would like to support us, consider becoming a subscriber to Duluth News Tribune at duluthnewstribune.com/subscribe. Join us again next time and discover the extraordinary stories that you just might miss. You're now in the right place at the right time, ready to step off the beaten path with no rush to return, here in Northlandia.